All right, so the Browns have announced that Bailey Zappe, or at least they leaked out that Bailey Zappe will be the starter this week. You always know a dude's about to get benched when like there's like a question of who's going to start, or the coach is like, "Oh, we're going to play both guys." Like that's always a sign that somebody's going to get benched. So the fact that they weren't like declaring DTR as a starter, and even then, like when the coach has to declare you as the starter, it's not known that you're a starter. Like I have never seen the Bengals declare that Joe Burrow is going to be the starter unless he got like an injury issue or something like that. So that usually tells you exactly where things are going. DTR injured, well not injured, but he's benched, right? He's played poorly this year. There's no doubt about it. He's had a awful season, and I remember talking about this on my rewatch, where rewatching the Dorian Thompson-Robinson games from 2023 during the offseason made me feel like DTR was even less of a legit option as a backup than I thought prior to it. And then the preseason happened. I was on the Tyler Huntley train. They wanted to stick with DTR. He had a decent preseason. And I think the problem with DTR is this, right? I do believe them when they say he has made strides in practice. And we see it in the preseason because he does look good in the preseason routinely. I think the problem with Dorian Thompson-Robinson is that the speed of the game is significantly different from the preseason and practice than it is in the regular season, right? If you look at his PFF grades in the preseason, he looks pretty damn good, right? He's got a 77.3 in 2024. 2023, he put up a 79. And then you look at his regular season grades for his career, and they drop all the way below 50 both years. The game speeds up for him, and all of that progress that he makes with how he's reading things and the balls that he's throwing and the type of mechanics that he's showing you in the preseason and in practice, it just goes away once the game gets faster because it's just going too fast for him, right? He can't speed it up in the way that he needs to. And I think the most damning thing is when you watch him in the preseason, the reason you like DTR is his ability to quickly process and throw an accurate short to intermediate football. When you watch DTR in the NFL, it is like, when actual NFL games, it is like DTR is playing with a blindfold on. Like, I'm not like trying to be facetious here or even be funny or roast the guy. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, from all accounts, from all the people I know that's ever interacted with this dude in person, seems to be a pretty great guy, right? Like, everybody I know that has talked to him, interacted with him, raves about his intangibles, his work ethic, his how good of a teammate that he is, his prep skills, all of this stuff, like, people rave about. He seems like a great young person. But when he has to play football in regular season games, it has consistently looked like this. He has one big time throw to 7 turnover worthy plays this year. In his career, he's had one big time throw, 13 turnover worthy plays. He, to me, is not useful on an NFL roster right now. And if you're the Cleveland Browns moving forward, you already know that there's a strong chance that you have a quarterback in Deshaun Watson who is not going to be useful on the NFL roster. Now, if he comes back from this Achilles injury, it looks like 2020 Deshaun Watson, sure, maybe there's like a 0.1% chance of that happening. Cool, we'll factor that in there. But more than likely, he's probably not going to be very useful to you. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, I think, is also not useful to you. Surprisingly, he's played worse than Deshaun Watson has, right? Because like Deshaun Watson couldn't get over 200 yards. Dorian couldn't get over 170. So massive concern there. He's had a couple of weeks of prep, and what he's giving you is 0 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. It is what it is. My man got 1 touchdown, 10 interceptions in his career. So he's throwing the same amount of interceptions that got Jameis Winston benched at this point. So that to me is what it is with DTR. He just is not useful for you anymore. And that's just what happens with the 5th round pick every once in a while, right? You draft somebody who's not going to be very useful to you. It's not really news. A lot of 5th round picks get cut their first year in the NFL. So I'm not really tripping that we spent a 5th rounder on him, especially that we got a 5th rounder back from the Josh Dobbs trade a couple of years ago. That 5th rounder, it is what it is. I know people are going to make a big deal out of it. Also, the thing I would caution is don't think about what the Browns do at specific positions in day 3 of the draft and think, oh, because the Browns have not drafted these specific positions well in day 3, that means they can't draft these positions or scout these positions. Day 3 of the draft is a crapshoot. No matter how good you are at scouting these players, you're bound to hit on some guys and you're bound to miss on some guys. The Browns seem to be really good at scouting wide receiver when they make these trades, right? Like they get Jerry Jeudy in, he makes a Pro Bowl his first season. I believe they can scout a wide receiver. It's just where are you spending that resource on wide receivers? Hell, Dorian Thompson-Robinson's friend, Cedric Tillman, seems like he's going to be a pretty good wide receiver in the NFL once he gets back from this concussion. So I think the Browns can. Obviously, they can scout for wide receivers. The problem has been where they're spending the resource. A big example of this is defensive tackle. For years, we thought Andrew Berry was terrible at finding these defensive tackles. But then you get Jawan Briggs in the 7th round, you get Mike Hall in the 2nd round, and all of a sudden, looks like they can scout defensive tackle really well. What they do in these top 3 rounds this year is going to be really important for this team, but I wouldn't try to use what they've done in the last like 5th round, 6th round, 7th round to kind of project what they could do going forward. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, 5th round pick, he looks like a 5th round pick. Now, Bailey Zappe. Who is Bailey Zappe? Why is Bailey Zappe coming into play, and what are the Browns hoping to see out of him? Bailey Zappe's 25 years old. He played at Western Kentucky in 2021. He was a 4th round selection from the New England Patriots. I believe he took over for the starting job a little bit for Mac Jones at the end of the Patriots run at some point. And then he spent a little bit of time in the practice squad of the Kansas City Chiefs, where he did make a good impression. So that's who Bailey Zappe is. One thing about Bailey Zappe is that he has proven himself to be a more effective NFL quarterback than DTR. And that goes to the reason I think that Bailey Zappe is playing in this game, which is to see just how broken things are. Because when you watch DTR out there the last few weeks, the offense looked broke. Like it looked broke. Like this offense looked broken. When he was out there against Kansas City, the offense looked broken. He had how many yards passing? Okay. When he was out there against Cincinnati, the offense looked broken. And when he was out there against Miami, the offense looked broken. And the question is the offense broken, or is it just DTR who's broken? I think the answer is obvious. I think it's DTR who's broken. We saw him last year come in, and a similar thing happened. And then you got PJ Walker coming in. He looked better. And then you had Joe Flacco come in. He looked better. And I think a similar thing will happen with Bailey Zappe. Like it'll be better than DTR, but like not like as good as like Jameis was operating the offense at certain points of the year. I don't think the offense is what's broken. I think it's just the quarterbacks that we've been putting out there. We've had some of the worst quarterback play in the NFL from 2 separate people this season, and it showed, right? It has had its effect on the year for sure. But yeah, that's what Bailey Zappe's going to be out there for, right? You just want to make sure that this offense isn't completely broken. Now, will that save Ken Dorsey's job? I don't know. It feels like they're circling the wagons to fire Ken Dorsey, to be honest with you, right? Now, there's an article that dropped by ESPN that I'm going to talk about in a separate video. But in that article, basically made it clear Kevin and AB, everybody in the building thinks highly of them. The concerns were about like, why is Ken Dorsey even here to begin with, right? And what direction does that swing? Now, if the building is as behind Kevin Stefanski as that article makes it appear, and again, we'll talk about that in a separate video, then kind of makes it obvious who's going to be the man hanging out, which is Ken Dorsey, right? I think they probably gonna move on from him, promote somebody from within to be the offensive coordinator or something like that. I don't think it's gonna be like a big move where they get like one of the Kubiak brothers or Kubiak kids to come in here. But we'll see. We'll see what happens with that whole situation. But either way, I think Ken Dorsey's on his way out. Speaking of guys who seem to be on their way out, I think Joe Bitonio's about to retire. That's the sense I get from the articles that the Cleveland Browns are dropping, like the featurettes that they are doing about Joe Bitonio. It just gives you the impression that they know he's about to retire, or that he's likely to retire. And if you look at his play over the last couple of years, I would agree that he's probably it's about time for him to retire. He hasn't been terrible, but he hasn't been Joe Bitonio for a couple of years. I think the back injury that he's had, or the number of back injuries that he's had over the last few years, have really mounted up on him and made it so he's not as powerful or able to move as well as he used to. And you could just see it when you watch him on tape. He doesn't do wide zone as well as he used to. He doesn't man block well. It's the end of the road for Joe. I expect him to retire soon. And it's unfortunate that Joe has to retire at this low point, but I think we should always remember that Joe Bitonio does represent something positive for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, this is a guy who was drafted in 2014. And if you remember that 2014 draft, that was one of the worst drafts of all time for the Cleveland Browns, at least in the first round. Browns selected number 8 overall when they had the 4th pick originally. They traded back to 8. They selected Justin Gilbert, who was a tremendous bust. He was cut within a couple of years, only to be usurped by Johnny Manziel. I will maintain this until the day I can't speak anymore. And then even then, I'll type it out. Johnny Manziel and Justin Gilbert were the 2 worst players in that 2014 draft class, like entirely. Like they were the 2 worst players. There were no 2 players who are worse at their position than those 2 dudes. I will maintain that one. If you disagree with me on that, show me the proof here. But I don't think there were 2 players that were drafted at their position that performed worse than those 2 dudes performed at their position. You got one guy who couldn't show up to meetings because he was asleep, and another guy who showed up to the meetings but didn't retain any information because he didn't care about a playbook. And the fact that you can't figure out who that guy is instinctually, like off the top, tells you the problem with that class. Like all-time terrible draft class. But second round, they got Joe Bitonio. And Joe has been there through it all, right? Johnny Manziel, 0-16, 1-15, the FUBU jerseys, the brown face mask with the classic jerseys. Like he's been through every era of the Cleveland Browns, and he's the last guy standing from the Joel Thomas era of offensive linemen that the Browns had in the mid-2000s. So I'm going to be supportive of Joe Bitonio in this last game of his. I hope he kicks some ass against the Baltimore Ravens and the Browns go out running the ball well. I expect the offense to look better with Bailey Zappe. Not like an incredible amount of better. Like I don't think they're going to beat the Baltimore Ravens, but maybe like instead of going 3 and out, they might just like get a couple field goals here and there. So that'd be a fun improvement. They'll use DTR to do like some run plays here or there. He's not like big enough to be effective running, even though he's a great athlete on a consistent basis. That's really the problem with him. But yeah, I expect the Browns to move on from DTR at the end of this season, probably move on from Ken Dorsey, and then likely have Joe Bitonio retiring. I think they already have the answer for Joe retiring in not Wyatt Teller, but in Zach Zinter. Then as far as like DTR not being on the team anymore, that's where you go in, you draft somebody in the late rounds this year, Riley Leonard, Will Howard, somebody in that class of quarterback, right, to take over as the new DTR guy. And that will be who kind of fills that role, because I think DTR is kind of proven he just ain't there, and he ain't getting there as fast as he needs to. But y'all have a great day. Have an even better night. Peace.